experienced the unraveling tale of deception. At a conference table, my lawyer pushed a solitary document towards me and spoke 5 words that altered everything. He had invoked the fraud provision. I gaped at him, stunned. For a decade, I believed I was wed to a woman who cherished me. For a decade, I had constructed a life, a business, a vision that I assumed we both nurtured. And in that instant, seated in a room overlooking the city, I discovered that every day of those 10 years was a fabrication. However, let's rewind to the genesis of this ordeal and its conclusion, where her lawyer's smile faded and my spouse was led away from a courtroom in handcuffs. I encountered Catherine in 2012. At the time, I was 31, managing a flourishing commercial real estate development firm I had nurtured from scratch after distancing myself from my father's domain. She was 28, serving as an executive assistant at a venture capital firm that leased space in one of my buildings. She possessed an unassuming beauty that warranted a second glance. However, it wasn't her appearance but her intellect that captivated me. Her inquisitiveness about my profession was authentic. She recalled specifics from past discussions that had occurred weeks prior. She made me feel truly understood in a way I hadn't experienced before. Unbeknownst to me, she had studied me for months preceding our serendipitous encounter in the lobby. Our relationship progressed swiftly. Just 8 months following our initial coffee, I proposed. Her family welcomed me with open arms. Everything seemed perfectly aligned. What I didn't realize was that as a developer from a wealthy background, I had learned early on that prenuptial agreements were non-negotiable. My father had undergone a harsh divorce when I was 12, and he made me vow never to marry without one. So 3 weeks before our wedding, I sat Catherine down and explained this, and she accepted the situation better than anticipated. "I'm not marrying you for your money," she said, gripping my hand. "I'm marrying you as you are the sole individual who has ever made me feel significant." My lawyer, Bradley Whitmore, drafted the prenuptial agreement, which was comprehensive and included infidelity clauses, asset protection, and standard provisions. However, Bradley was cautious to a fault, including the fraud provision, Section 14, Paragraph 3, that wouldn't be relevant for another 11 years. This clause stated in legal terminology that any intentional hiding of assets, income, or financial activities by either party would be considered material fraud, rendering all spousal claims invalid and making the offending party responsible for all investigative and legal expenses. Catherine signed it without hesitation. Watching her sign, I felt fortunate to have found someone so reasonable. Unbeknownst to me, I was witnessing the first move in a game I hadn't realized I was participating in. For the initial 7 years of our marriage, things appeared normal and even happy. After purchasing a suburban home and renovating it together, we ventured to cities like Paris, Tokyo, Barcelona. Although Catherine never held a job post our marriage, she expertly managed our household affairs with meticulousness. Bills were always paid on time, social engagements organized, and dinner parties hosted that left an impression on my clients. Despite my long working hours, Catherine never uttered a complaint. She expressed understanding and pride in the work I was doing. We attempted to conceive children but failed. While I assumed we grieved together, I now question if she felt some relief. The transformation began approximately 8 years into our marriage. It was initially subtle. My wife established new friendships that excluded me. She joined a women's investment club and frequently attended wellness retreats multiple times a year. I placed my trust in her completely as I had no reason not to. Unbeknownst to me, my spouse had rekindled an old friendship with Raymond Casalano, whom she knew from college. Currently, he functioned as a financial consultant, focusing on wealth reorganization. I became aware later that Raymond and Catherine had been romantically entwined prior to my arrival. It was also discovered that their bond never truly terminated. The chain of events commenced with an ordinary issue, a tax inconsistency. I had an accountant named Dominic Harwood who oversaw my financial dealings. Dominic is the type of individual who detects even the slightest discrepancy in massive datasets. In January of year 11, he phoned me about a query that appeared minor initially. "There's a recurring transfer from your family account," he stated. "Monthly around $2,300. It began approximately 2 years ago. Are you aware of its purpose?" I was not. Our household expenditures flowed through that account, and Catherine managed it. I presumed it was a commonplace occurrence, possibly a charitable contribution or a forgotten subscription service. "I'll inquire with Catherine," I responded. Our conversation didn't unfold as anticipated. During dinner that night, when I brought up the topic of transfers, Catherine's expression briefly altered. If I hadn't been paying close attention, I might have missed it. a fleeting hint of something chilly behind her eyes before warmth resumed. "Ah, that's just my wellness fund," she replied casually. "I believe I mentioned it to you." She hadn't. Her response, the calculated ease, unsettled me for the first time in our marriage. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I rationalized that a decade plus of trust signified something. However, I also asked Dominic to delve deeper. What Dominic uncovered took him 3 weeks to assemble. The $2,300 transfers weren't deposited into any wellness fund. Instead, they were directed to an LLC named Cascade Financial Partners, incorporated in Delaware and having a mailing address in Nevada. The LLC had one recorded director, a woman identified as Evelyn Hartwell. However, Evelyn Hartwell was not real. The social security number associated with her was that of a woman from Ohio who passed away in 1987. As I sat in Dominic's office, the documents before me caused my perception of reality to fracture. "There's more," Dominic cautioned. He then displayed additional documentation. Upon examining it, I traced where the money ended up after reaching Cascade. It moved through 3 additional LLCs and finally settled in an account in the Cayman Islands. Over the past 26 months, this account received approximately $280,000. This amount, our household funds, had been diverted, distributed in small amounts to bypass automatic review, funneled through shell companies created to conceal its trail. "Who manages the Cayman account?" I asked, already aware that Catherine's name would not be on it. "A trust," Dominic replied. The trustee's name is Raymond Casalano, a man I wasn't familiar with then but would become acquainted with soon. That night I refrained from confronting Catherine. I couldn't. For hours I sat in my home office, fixated on the framed photo on my desk of our wedding day, both of us beaming, her hand resting on my chest. I tried to reconcile this image with the woman who had been embezzling from me for years. I recalled every conversation we'd shared, every time she professed her love. Each night I drifted off to sleep feeling fortunate, and then I remembered what my father had said after his divorce. "Son, when someone deceives you, your feelings will demand a course of action. Don't give in. Reflect, strategize, act." Following this advice, the next morning I contacted Philip Garrison, a divorce attorney with a reputation for handling high-profile cases with discretion and precision, and known for his meticulousness. He was expensive, but precisely what I required. Additionally, I engaged the services of a private investigator named Charlotte Webb. For 15 years, Charlotte handled corporate fraud cases until she became independent. Her expertise lay in what she termed pattern analysis, uncovering patterns of behavior, connections, and concealed relationships. Over the following 4 months, I accumulated evidence while sustaining the appearance of my marriage. Charlotte's investigation unveiled the extent of the situation at hand. Raymond Casalano was not merely Catherine's financial advisor. They had dated for 3 years in their 20s, a relationship that ended poorly when he was caught embezzling from his employer. At the time, Catherine testified on his behalf, stating her ignorance of his actions. He narrowly avoided prison, but they remained connected. Phone records demonstrated that Catherine and Raymond had been frequently communicating since before our marriage, with the frequency escalating significantly after our wedding, peaking even more after I signed documents for a significant development deal, enhancing my net worth considerably. Charlotte uncovered a chilling discovery, a pair of emails between Catherine and Raymond dated 2 months prior to our acquaintance. In one message, Raymond stated, "The subject is solitary. Wealth management trust problems resulting from parental divorce, seeking stability, you're aware of the drill, act accordingly." Catherine replied, "I'm already working on it. This is the one. Give me 18 months and we'll be able to vanish." Their plot had been in motion since before our initial encounter. The entire relationship, spanning 11 years of my life, was a decade-long fraud scheme. However, they overstepped their bounds. 17 months had expanded into 11 years, and errors were made along the way. The gravest error was activating the fraud clause. Section 14, paragraph 3 left no room for ambiguity. It didn't merely address hidden assets. It encompassed any intentional concealment of financial transactions, shell companies, offshore accounts, and systematic rerouting of funds. Each authorized transfer Catherine consented to represented a distinct breach. Crucially, the agreement stipulated that if fraud was established, the culpable party would relinquish all marital property claims and be liable for full restitution, along with legal and investigative expenses. Catherine had personally signed this document, claiming she had read it or not. She had her own lawyer examine it beforehand. Regrettably, this agreement was set to devastate her. Catherine initiated the divorce proceedings first. I believe she perceived a change, though she wasn't aware of all the facts as I knew them. Her attorney's name was Philip Brennan, no relative to the judge we would later face in court. He entered the case with confidence. Catherine depicted me as a workaholic who neglected her, who prioritized business over family, who drove her to seek emotional solace elsewhere. She requested half of all marital assets, lifelong spousal support, and ownership of our house. Her initial filing did not acknowledge her own financial dealings. During 2 initial court proceedings, I allowed her lawyer to construct a tale of me as an affluent yet negligent husband, and her as a devoted, solitary wife. Subsequently, I submitted my counterargument. On the day of the disclosure hearing, I arrived ahead of time accompanied by Philip Garrison and a paralegal, carrying 4 containers filled with documentation. Catherine was already seated at the opposing table with her attorney, appearing poised and self-assured. Her hair was neatly styled, her attire carefully chosen to portray victimhood without appearing vulnerable. Having not seen me for 3 weeks, as I had moved into a corporate apartment upon filing, our eyes met, and I noticed a brief flicker of doubt in her expression. Perhaps my expression seemed more tranquil than she anticipated. Judge Theodore Brennan entered, prompting everyone to stand. A 72-year-old former prosecutor known for his accuracy and intolerance towards legal trickery. He had spent decades handling white-collar cases before assuming the bench. The defense is asking for an extended discovery period, which we find unwarranted and intended to postpone the proceedings. However, my client merely seeks what she's rightfully entitled to after 11 years of marriage with Mr. Brennan, as Judge Theodore Brennan interjected. I'd like to bring the court's attention to a matter mentioned in the respondent's documents, Judge Brennan. Catherine's counsel paused. This was not typical for these hearings. Your Honor, the judge addressed Philip. Mr. Garrison, you've submitted a motion alleging material fraud under the Prenuptial Agreement Section 14, and approximately 800 pages of supporting evidence. Could you please summarize? Rising to speak, Philip said. Over the past 11 years, the petitioner has allegedly diverted around $284,000 from marital funds via a complex network of shell corporations designed to conceal the financial transactions. The funds ended up in an offshore account managed by Raymond Casolano, a long-standing acquaintance of the respondent, with whom she had kept a hidden relationship since before the marriage. As stated by Philip, the respondent agreed to a prenuptial contract that includes a fraud provision explicitly stating that any intentional concealment of assets or financial activities renders null and void all spousal claims and subjects the offender to full responsibility. We argue that the respondent has activated this clause due to demonstrated deliberate and persistent fraudulent actions. The courtroom fell quiet, and Judge Brennan addressed Catherine's counsel. Attorney, were you aware of your client's financial activities when filing this petition? However, her confidence waned, and she replied, Your Honor, my client swore that all asset disclosures were complete. I was not. The judge declared, I was unaware of. I'll be taking a short break. He suggested, You might utilize this time to scrutinize the documents Mr. Garrison submitted and inform your client accordingly. The pause lasted 45 minutes. In the corridor, I stayed with Philip, keeping an eye on the door leading to the conference room where Catherine and her lawyer had withdrawn. I could pick up voices through the walls, not the words but the tones. Her attorney's voice was pressing, probing. Catherine's tone grew more anxious as they exited. Her attorney appeared pale. Catherine seemed transformed, her poise broken, her eyes bloodshot, holding a tissue. We reconvened. Judge Brennan glanced at the opposing table. Counsel, Catherine's lawyer stood hesitantly. Your Honor, considering the evidence shown, the petitioner requests a postponement to thoroughly examine it. But Judge Brennan refused briskly. The respondent had submitted proof of ongoing financial deceit. The defendant has been given adequate chances to reveal these actions. What I'd like to know, Mrs. Casolano, is if you have any response. Catherine shuddered at the name, as it hadn't been used for over a decade. Brennan was emphasizing something. Your Honor, she started, her voice quivering. I can clarify, I have emails in this file, she said as the judge picked up a document from November 2011 before meeting the respondent. In these emails, you and Mr. Raymond Casolano discussed a long-term financial scheme against the respondent, referring to him as an ideal profile. Is this your communication? Catherine's lawyer attempted to intervene. Your Honor, those emails might have been obtained. They were obtained legally during the discovery process, Philip said calmly. I've seen it from the email provider's servers. Catherine remained quiet. Her hands were now shaking, tightly clutching a tissue that was beginning to tear. Judge Brennan addressed Casolano. I will ask you one more time, are these your emails? Catherine murmured. I need to talk to my attorney. You can speak to him soon. For now, I'm asking you a direct question. Did you compose these messages? There was a prolonged silence. Eventually, Catherine whispered, yes. Subsequently, Judge Brennan determined that Catherine materially breached the fraud clause in our prenuptial agreement, which nullified all her demands regarding marital property. He also mandated an audit of misappropriated funds and ruled that she was responsible for full restitution, as well as my legal and investigative expenses. However, he wasn't done yet. The evidence presented in this court, he said, suggests not only civil fraud but what seems to be criminal activity, including identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Catherine wept profusely, not the subtle tears from her initial filing but raw, desperate sobs. Her attorney requested a pause. The judge granted it. Upon their return, the attorney's voice sounded hollow. Your Honor, he said, considering the situation, the petitioner is retracting her divorce application and is open to negotiating a structured settlement for restitution. That won't be necessary, Philip responded. The respondent will file for divorce and will pursue enforcement of all fraud provisions and damages. Judge Brennan acknowledged this. Understood. Proceed as planned with the case, he said. Looking at Catherine one last time, he advised, Mrs. Casolano, I recommend you hire a criminal defense lawyer. You'll need one. The criminal trial progressed faster than anticipated. Raymond Casolano was apprehended in Miami 2 weeks later while attempting to board a flight to Grand Cayman. Ruth, his mother, had provided information to investigators for immunity, as she discovered Raymond had fraudulently used her identity to establish shell companies without her consent, making her enraged. Catherine was apprehended the subsequent day, facing charges such as wire fraud, identity theft, conspiring to commit fraud, and money laundering. Her bail was fixed at $500,000. However, her family couldn't meet this amount. The prosecution proposed a plea deal, a reduction of 15 years to 8 with good behavior in exchange for testifying against Raymond and recovering any obtainable funds. She accepted the offer. At her sentencing hearing, she requested to speak before the court. I was present, seated at the back. I acknowledge that what I did was wrong, she stated, her voice monotonous and practiced. I strayed from the person I wished to be. I accept full responsibility. However, the judge, unlike our civil proceedings judge, remained unaffected. Mrs. Casolano, the evidence implies you never wavered in your intentions. From the start, you knew your identity and purpose. What was forfeited was a risky venture. She was imprisoned for 7 years, while Raymond served 12. The financial recuperation took more time than the court proceedings. Most of the misdirected funds were squandered on extravagant travels, Raymond's unsuccessful investment ventures, but the offshore account still retained roughly $140,000, which was retrieved and returned to me. A civil judgment against Catherine covered the rest, though collecting it might take years if ever. I sold the house. It was no longer a place I could reside in. The development company kept expanding. Work became my refuge, the sole domain of my life where effort and outcome still corresponded reliably. My father contacted me a week after the sentencing. He'd kept tabs on the case but chose not to meddle. You dealt with it correctly, he said. More so than I did. It doesn't feel like victory, I responded. It wasn't supposed to, he replied. Yet it's preferable to losing. Occasionally, people inquire if I harbor remorse about the marriage, an 11-year chapter marred by deceit. Each recollection from that era is tainted. The vacations, the shared dinners, those quiet instances presumed genuine, they evoke a peculiar form of sorrow for something that never truly materialized. However, I also reflect upon what I gained. I discovered the value of trusting my instincts. That initial pang of suspicion when Catherine brushed off the financial transactions, I could have disregarded. Many would have. I realized that proof is paramount. Feelings might be valid, but they don't prevail in courtrooms. Evidence does. Additionally, I learned that some individuals are exactly as they appear, and others put up such convincing performances that you can't discern the difference until you see their script. Catherine remains imprisoned. She'll be released in 4 years if she behaves well. I'm unaware of her plans post-release. I don't care. A year ago, Raymond attended his parole hearing, which was rejected. Recently, I was dining at a downtown restaurant when a woman around her mid-30s approached my table with a friendly smile. I apologize for interrupting, she said, but I believe we met at the Carlton event last year. I'm new to this city and I recognized you. I examined her for a lengthy moment. She was polished, self-assured. Her approach was relaxed yet deliberate. I don't think so, I replied calmly. However, if we did meet, I am uninterested, she chuckled, a sound practiced in deception. I didn't engage in conversation, especially not with her. She left and I finished my meal alone. There are lessons one learns only once if you're watching this. If something about your partner seems suspicious, be it financial irregularities, inconsistent stories, or unexplained absences, don't disregard the signs. Trust your intuition, collect your proof discreetly, and seek assistance from someone who can aid you in understanding the situation before addressing it, as the person lying beside you could very well be the one you suspect. They might also bide their time until you're distracted to complete what they began. My wife's lawyer smiled, unaware that he was doing so. The prenuptial agreement contained a fraud provision she had activated, and now she has 7 years to ponder the price of that smile she cost him.